Welcome to Share Speech.
As I said, all translation is commentary. So when we translate things, we often have a bias. And I don't mean that in a bad way. We just have a perspective. Mm-hmm. And the way that we choose to translate things is often going to be influenced by what we're bringing in. And sometimes we, in reading things in translation, if we can go back to the source and kind of figure out where have people played with it, we can learn a lot about what people are trying to say or their experience. But it also means that we have to be careful whenever we're reading something in translation, because there is that risk. And many folks are not willing. They're not willing to admit defeat. So when they come to a word that they don't know, rather than say, "Hey, I don't know, and I'm not going to try to guess," they'll just sort of go for it whole hog, which can really be a problem because, as I said, one word can make a huge amount of difference. And if you're basing something on one possibly mistranslated word or misunderstood word, you can really make a mess of things.
And then there's that whole chain effect that goes down through that.
Yeah, some books are much better, and translations are better about kind of owning up to, hey, we're not sure here. Other ones just forge ahead and go, no, we got to define all the words. We're going to come up with something. But the reality is that some words just we don't have a translation. In some cases, we just don't know enough to even be able to say, because context gives us clues. But there's another word that it's in Hebrew, na, and it's some sort of, seems to be some sort of word of respect.
Okay.
And there are times when people say it to God, which you can understand. I'm going in front of someone, so I'm going to say some sort of honorific word. But there are other times when God is speaking to people and uses the same thing. And if you think that the same word of respect is used from person to deity and deity to person, there's something going on there. But we can't quite, at least in English, there's not because we don't really talk that way. So we don't have a word to say, oh, this is the same, functions in the same way.
Yeah.
And so some translations will just sort of skip it, some will put it in, but it's left to us to try and figure out what is going on here and what does this word mean kind of broadly rather than specifically, because we can't figure out the actual 100% meaning.
So one of the ideas I'm picking up from the translations, but also just the perception of each individual word, possibly, it's dependent upon the person, or at least their history for the most part. So I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, this makes sense why valuing others' perspectives and having this diversity in thought, maybe not just appearance, because that's not really a huge thing, but we want the diversity in thought, why that's so valuable and precious, because who is any one person to sit and say they know the absolute truth that God gave? I think that's probably one of the ultimate lessons of humility is, being confident given your thing, being honest how you would interpret the Tanakh, even just the world, but then having the humility to recognize, well, I could be wrong. I probably am on a lot, but it's still me even putting myself out there to be critiqued, to critique something, allows other people to see it, and maybe they might find something good, maybe they show how it's horrible, and then some good comes from that. But eventually, the idea of having other people break down even something that's as traditional as, a book that's 3,000 years old, thousands of years old, we still see benefit from allowing new interpretations. So I guess this is one of the hallmarks of my book, never assuming we know everything. Right. I mean, even if you could recite the Torah perfectly and you're one of the people who write it, even those people probably don't have the absolute credibility to know the exact perfect translation in every detail. They might be able to recite it and write it, but there's still those nuances. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, well, and that brings us back to the commentary, right? All is commentary in the commentaries. That the commentators were scholars and well versed, and probably more versed than any of us could hope to be. and they offered their insights and opinions. And I think to them there was how much humility was there probably varied between the guys. But they were certain they were teaching this. In some cases, it was things that they had learned. Other times, it was things they figured out or conclusions they came to. And one of the beautiful things about the way that we do Bible study, is that they're in conversation with one another.
Yeah.
So you get someone in, the 1200s in France who offers an insight on something, and then 100 years later, someone in Spain is going to say, "Well, that guy got it completely wrong. This is the way to understand this." And then maybe 50 years later, in Egypt, someone's going to say, "Well, actually, the first guy was right, but for the wrong reasons, and the second guy was wrong for the right reasons." And we get to, and sometimes they're snarky with each other. They'll I mean, it's wonderful when they just kind of take shots at each other. Of course, half the time they do that, the other person is long dead, so they can't respond. But injecting a little personality into it, right? And that we talk about a chain of tradition, right? And that each one of these people adds another link to the chain, and we live in this amazing time that we have the benefit that we are literate at levels that were unimaginable in generations past, and that we have access to so many of the texts, and many of them in translation. So if we don't speak Hebrew or Aramaic or Arabic or Spanish or any of the languages that these things were originally written in, we have access to them, and we can engage with them. And then once we've assimilated all of that, then it gives us an opportunity to go, okay, what do I think? Because oftentimes in a lot of spaces where they study Bible, someone gets up and they read a passage, and either they say, "This is what it means. I will provide you with no sources, no opportunity to ask questions or to critique, and we're moving on." Right? This is what we believe, or this is what I believe. You should too.
Project.
Or in some where they're much more interactive. It means that someone will read it, and then everyone shares their feelings as to what it means. And we absolutely should have opinions about this and should understanding, but knowing that the translations are only so useful, and knowing that there are generation upon generation of scholars and commentators who have studied this and have looked at all sorts of different sources and things and brought that together to help guide our understanding, to ignore all of that and to just jump to this is what I think based on one quick reading doesn't really do us that much of a service, and in fact can lead us wrong, because we are influenced by things that we've heard or the values and mores of our society, and we tend to read things into the text that aren't necessarily there. And much of human history, or at least since these texts came about, can probably be traced to readings and misreadings of the text, and that that's not I think what they were hoping for with something that's ostensibly aimed at creating peace and a perfect society.
And I think one of the aims possibly with having all these interpretations and valuing the diverse perspectives is almost making it safeguards so that if there's even one person who's able to do any kind of translation, any kind of interpretation, if one guy is able to, everyone has to be able to then. Right? So to me, it kind of makes me think of freedom of speech, and you have the right to, and even freedom of religion, you have the right to do what you want. And because you have this right for you to be able to vary and to have your own uniqueness, so does everyone else. But then, right, the lines that we draw as the culture to make sure you don't go too much.